You're listening to the Friends Talking Nerdy Podcast Network.
Friends Talking Nerdy. If your friends are nerdy and you are nerdy too, I want to talk to you. Friends Talking Nerdy.
Hello, people. How you doing today? This is Tim Jousma, welcoming you to another episode of Friends Talking Nerdy. And joining me, as usual, all the way in Maine, we have her Holiness, the Reverend Tracy. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Tim. Just another fabulous week getting into spring because, you know, the thing you don't realize when you move somewhere is you get to learn how tolerant your body is going to be of any spring allergens as they start popping up.
Mm-hmm.
So still recovering from jet lag that I feel like was somehow made worse, right? Because when I came, because you're aware the week I was there, you guys were in full bloom of your cherry blossoms. So I had none of like the small inklings of pollen.
Oh,
Yeah, like just getting over the allergies incurred by my Oregon visit. Now I'm starting to get the spring allergies here. I'm like, oh great, yeah, all this flora that my body is like, what the fuck is this?
And think about all the new stuff that maybe you have not been around in terms of like different types of trees, different types of animals and whatnot. So
oh yeah, exactly my point.
Yeah.
Exactly my point. But how are you?
I'm doing good. I am doing good. Been a busy week here. Like I mentioned on the TNT review, school has started this week for me. So definitely excited to dive into classes all relating to writing this term. So I am definitely excited for that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. And then tomorrow I'm getting tested for ADHD, which is going to be interesting here. It was actually a free service from the school, PCC, believe it or not. Part of your tuition, you can take advantage of services like that. And while I don't think I necessarily have it, there are enough symptoms that kind of correlate to issues I've dealt with over the years that make me think, why not give it a try and check it out, see what happens? You know, what's the worst that can happen?
Oh, exactly. Right. What's the absolute worst? Said nobody before something bad happened. No, I'm just kidding. I'm actually happy anytime you take something, you take classes, you take initiative and you start doing shit. Like that's worth celebrating. It doesn't matter if it's like, oh, well, you know, it should only be for a job. It's like, no, come on, get over it. Like there's so many cool things you can go and learn.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know if people have ever noticed, but sometimes in certain areas, you'll get those catalogs for just adult education. And it's not really geared towards a certification towards anything. But, you know, I took a weekend class that was going canyoneering outside of Arizona. But that sure, it could have counted as a credit if I wanted it to.
Right.
But mostly people used it as a day trip and you're still learning like some physical skills. So good on you. And again, it goes into, I can't see investing in the skill set that is writing as being something that's going to hurt you. Like, it's not like you're taking up doing like methamphetamines or something. It's a good change in life, right?
Yeah, going to crystal meth, I guess. I don't know.
Well, it goes into some of the stuff that we will inevitably talk about is really like we're seeking dopamine things, right? So There is probably a part of you that is experiencing some cool dopamine high effects from like just taking action and moving towards things that you don't feel like required to do or something like that. Oh gosh, maybe I've got a ghost. Sorry. For those listening, my camera just went nuts and like just went really blurry for a second and it totally just blew my mind for a moment. So sorry about that, guys.
I mean, it was almost like in a TV show when the camera like fades out when you're going to like a flashback or something like that. It was like that time back at the old farm when.
So that distraction aside, like because we do seek those out, like that's some of our nature is to seek out things. I'm always happy when it's something that's like a positive thing, right? Because you hate to hear your friends like, you know, I've started going to the bar more often. And it's like, well, is that necessarily a good thing? You know?
Yeah. And then, no, I mean, I've been a writer ever since I was a kid, as I mentioned on the show here. And as you know, I used to do freelance writing with websites like Latino Review Media and whatnot. And I am good at this writing thing, I think, and I would like to get better. I mean, in terms of lofty dreams, it would be great to publish books, to make money doing that stuff. But again, I keep the same mindset I have with that I do with podcasting. If like I get hit by a bus tomorrow and I don't publish a work, that doesn't mean I didn't take absolute joy in creating that work. It's not about the money.
Oh, exactly. So, I mean, even if you're taking like a film class or two because you want to maybe try to make little videos and things, like you don't know unless you try. And some of people's origin stories, start off just by trying. So good on you for trying, Tim.
Yeah, I mean, well, look at Kevin Smith. I mean, initially he had a dream of being a filmmaker, and then by the time the filmmaking dream was achieved, and he realized it wasn't necessarily everything that he wanted, podcasting came along, and he was able to move into that and be very much successful. But these topics are kind of interesting, and this is something we've actually been talking about for the past few weeks in terms of the time of the year. And I remember a few weeks back we were talking about the topic of spring cleaning in text messages, and I had the epiphany, and I said to you, like, why are we texting about this? Why not make this an episode? So here we are. The topic today, spring cleaning.
Spring cleaning, yes, because I start thinking about things like routines, and spring cleaning is a routine, right? It's kind of one that we've embraced. I don't know of how many people actually practice spring cleaning, but most people are at least aware that this is a concept that we more or less support in our culture. Right. But I love nerding out about it on the sense of it is one of those surprising things you can do that's a little bit brain hacky and helps you not accidentally exacerbate things with mental health. Like if you already, are a person that has to manage anxiety or depression or, interestingly enough, ADHD, which often that coexists with a lot of those, anxiety, depression disorders. Yep. So it's also cleaning is something you can do to help with that. And when you don't do it, it also can make that worse. So I do love to take an opportunity to kind of nerd out about cleaning, and why not in the spring when supposedly we embrace that this is supposed to happen.
Well, if you think about it too, I mean, it's like we were texting when initially talking about the topic. I think this time of year, I think humans in general do feel the need for change of some sort. It's like the weather's changing. It's getting to a point where you can get outside and be a human again. Like in Portland here, it's going to be in the 70s today, for goodness sake. And just this time of year, it's like a bear coming out of hibernation, really. I mean, it's like you are up and you are ready to go and you want to do something.
Exactly. And that's even started happening with me. And, we'll get through that because that's really what kind of spurred some of this topic anyway, was I'm in that point. I'm like, yeah, I want to establish some good routines. So let's talk about what that does first. And then I figured I can share like some of the ways that I've incorporated these thoughts, how I feel that it's helped me in my mental space, because it is no secret. I am a person I do have a diagnosis of PTSD. I have also had past diagnosis of depression as we kind of put together stuff. And then I personally think CPTSD more fits the bill, but I'm working towards getting that diagnosis officially. So I like to be very open when I talk about like, these are the things that help me. And just a real quick blurb on this is the invisible illnesses that I deal with that you might not know, because, some people, or most of their experience of me is social media, and, it doesn't really serve to be very pouty on there for me. I've done that before. I've tried it. Didn't work very well. But so here's something I've tried. Being on social media less is also one of those. And what helps with that is getting elbow deep in some cleaning stuff. So, experts say one of the first sites that I kind of went into was this Psy.com or Psy.net website, and it actually has some linked sources, but it's talking about the mental health benefits of cleaning. So I want to talk about that first before I get into even why, or routines that you can establish and stuff like that. But they do have a quote in there that says, experts say a disorganized and messy house can contribute to feelings of stress, anxiety, and depression. And what I like about this article is if you do, we'll share it in the notes. If you do click on it, they do have a lot of sources, so you can go and actually dig into these studies that they are talking about. I did not have time to go into all these. I have read studies on some of the stuff in the past. I couldn't find the exact same ones, but these may have been some of the ones that I read. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, and also too, for the audience at home, just because she said that doesn't mean she's like reading from a Wikipedia article. There was some work put into this.
Yes. Now, granted, there is a Wikipedia quote that I do have like later on.
Well, so
but,
also,
it's backing this. The point is there's a lot of stuff out there that seems to back this idea that cleaning is good for you, and that there are maybe some things that are symptoms that we could be a little bit more open in recognizing that they exist, right? Because when you've got a lot of people agreeing, and that's Wikipedia. I know it used to be a lot more Wild West than it is now. Like now you might get a little bit of misinformation on there, but I don't think it stays on very long anymore.
Well, the thing to keep in mind with the Wikipedia is this. I think the big people that really push that are, like teachers, professors. And if you are in school doing some research, don't go to Wikipedia as your main source. But Wikipedia can be a great way to kind of, like if you have interests on a new topic, it'll leave you breadcrumbs to other legitimate places, other legitimate sources. It's a way to kind of get like a Cliff's Notes version of something.
Exactly. And so I like sometimes how they layman's terms things. So if you take it with a grain of that, just make sure you find other stuff that maybe backs the Wikipedia article. Was a little side nerd for people that like to research stuff for themselves. But so the Psy.com, they kind of go into how they talk to people who successfully use cleaning to reduce their anxiety. So I do like to point out this article does seem to like, it wasn't clear if they talked to anybody who said that it didn't help, which to me, they're kind of being open about like, there's a potential for some bias in the article itself, but the studies you can dig into individually and interpret them and see if you come out with the same ideas that they did. But they did mention that there is research out there that suggests that cleaning or lack of it may be linked often to mental health stuff. And that's something that I know we'll get into a little bit deeper later is, here's one of those things that is saying that, when people aren't cleaning and when you're not like hygiene or taking care of your home, that can be a sign or a symptom that you might be dealing with some depression, anxiety, or things of that nature that might be worth, considering and checking out. So anyway, on the one hand, a cool quote from this was doing household chores can serve as a productive distraction. Like if you try to implement delay, distract, and then like later decide, it's another response to feeling triggered is delay, distract. So if you're looking for a delay or distraction because you are feeling anxious, and that can even be that pit in your stomach for no reason that you understand, I guess apparently cleaning can act a lot like gardening. And things like that. So if you can get yourself into a zone, say with some good music, and kind of start that process, it has that benefit of also acting as a handcraft. So, and a distraction. So it's interesting. And we know like doing like crafts like crocheting is almost like meditative. So those are things that are also good for anxiety, depression, and things of those nature. So yeah, I just absolutely loved kind of reading an article. It's like, oh, well, yeah, because of course, cleaning, especially if you can get into like an organization project, can really be kind of like, I don't know, have you ever gotten like surprisingly into like a project like that? Like even something as simple as like rearranging your cupboard.
Well, you know me. The answer to that is no.
No, like a writing desk, anything. A creative space, like something that you really kind of like nerded out.
Well, in terms of like, like reorganizing or cleaning up, you saw one of my old apartment, I didn't have much in there, but to your point, at times to where I was dealing with, like extreme stress, depression and whatnot, it got a little messy. And, and admittedly, yeah, there were times to where, just like moving like my computer from like the left side of my bed to the right side of my bed, or moving the bed slightly a few inches to the left, not much effort, but it was enough to give it a different perspective in the room and just kind of trick your brain into thinking things are different, and you have some progress going on. So even though I'm not the best one with the example as mentioned here, I totally get the point, because also it's the same with writing as well. I mean, like a lot of times writers or creatives, when they get into like a mental block for a certain something, it's always recommended do something else. If you're writing and you're stuck, pick up a guitar, play that way, or heck, watch a movie, play a video game. Just using a different part of your brain can actually help you go back to solve whatever problem you're having with like whatever the issue is in the first place.
It absolutely can. And by the way, I don't need to it doesn't have to be like the example of cleaning or tidying up a physical space. It could even be like doing an outline for a book and how you can really zone in and focus, and how like almost calming some of those things can be. I'm going to go into a little bit more with how making checklists can do that too. But yeah, so the last thing that they kind of mentioned in that article that I wanted to, touch on, because again, there's a whole article here. We'll share it. You can read the entirety of it. But they do reference a 2011 study from Princeton University Neuroscience Institute that compared the impact of living in a cluttered versus organized spaces, and found that too many visual stimuli, so things like shoes on a staircase, a sink full of dishes, wrinkled clothes in the dryer, actually makes it harder for the brain to focus and process information. And that overload can be stressful for some people. So it's really kind of interesting, because not only can cleaning help, like I said, almost the same way meditation or gardening does, as a physical activity that you're also distracting with. So that's two other benefits. It also can reduce your overall stress and anxiety by not having too much excess visual stimulus in your home, because it kind of almost feeds into the next thing I wanted to nerd outside into that I feel is super related to cleaning, and that is decision fatigue. And having those cluttered spaces like that is very similar to how making multiple decisions can lead to decision fatigue. But before I get like deeper into decision fatigue, I wanted to like make sure I took a breath in case there was anything you wanted to throw in there.
No, I mean, like I read through the notes too, and I'm glad we're touching upon the decision fatigue, because as somebody that deals with anxiety issues, with a lot of my problems are resulting from my brain asking too many questions anyway. Having, it's like when you're dealing with all that stress, having to deal with the dishes, having to deal with the dirty room, having to deal with a dirty bathroom. It's like sometimes it's just like you just want to push that stuff away and say, fuck it.
Oh, exactly. And that can be such a slippery slope, right? So yeah, I'll just go ahead and go into it. My Wikipedia sum up that I really did like how they threw it out there. Decision fatigue refers to the deteriorating quality of decisions made by an individual after a long session of decision making. It is now understood as one of the causes of irrational trade-offs in decision making. And an irrational trade-off, like it can be as simple as, eating fast food every night on the way home is not good for your health, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of an irrational trade-off to keep making decisions, to do that over figuring out a way to try to get like healthy meals that work for your lifestyle. And I don't say that to shame anybody. I try very hard to not say this with any just tone. I get that it's not easy. Hey, like I kind of like that there is like a whole calendar of food at a cafeteria at school. And a lot of that is so that they don't have to think about it all the time, right? Like there are so many systems that build in so that they don't have to have decision fatigue. And, that helps them function and put that same mental processes towards other things that do require your attention. So that's why I wanted to, again, go a little bit more into defining decision fatigue and how I kind of blend that with the cleaning stuff. And I feel like it's really had a great impact on my life. There was a really good quote that I also found from a lady named Debbie Steer. She's the founder of a website called The Perfect Score. And this is from, I think, some of her musings as she is currently writing a book about her experience trying to get a perfect SAT score. So I just kind of think that of all the quotes I randomly stumbled across, I thought this one was cool. No matter how rational and high-minded you try to be, you can't make decision after decision without paying a biological price. It's different from ordinary physical fatigue. you're not consciously aware of being tired, but you're low on mental energy. The more choices you make throughout the day, the harder each one becomes for your brain. And eventually it starts looking for shortcuts. So a great way to sum up kind of decision fatigue there.
Yeah, and this is something I've actually been having to deal with school, especially this past year. And when you're in college doing a majority of your classes online or remotely, I mean, PCC does not have in-school classes as of yet, still because of the pandemic. What I've found, I mean, initially when I first started, I had the mindset of on Monday I will do class number 1, on Tuesday I would do class number 2, and that was a big mistake because I would get to the point to where 2 hours in is fine. 4 hours in, it's like a little fatigue and whatnot, but 6 to 8 hours in, if I'm still even studying at that point, it's like my mind is like in a bunch of different places. And what I found has worked best in that particular instance is that split it up. Like class number 1, couple hours on Monday, then you, after that 2 hours, take a break, and then spend a couple hours on another class, which works a different part of the brain. Then you take a break, and you want to structure it to where you don't have something that's kind of like overwhelming you. If you're looking at like a big pile of it'd be like looking at a big pile of like washed towels that you have to fold. If it's like a huge pile, to me, I'd be like, fuck it. I don't need towels. I can buy new ones.
And that so goes into you're not making rational decisions, right? Like, come on, think about that's not a rational decision, right? To decide to buy new towels over cleaning. But people really do fall into the slippery slope. And it's even stuff like, oh my God, I misplaced my headphones. Well, I'm going to go buy new ones. Instead of cleaning to find the thing that you know for a fact that you own. But again, like I try not to make fun of it, like in the sense of like making fun of the human, but I deflect with humor. And by the way, these are things that I've struggled with personally, like buying a new thing over taking a minute to actually go and organize and go through it. Especially because I have had dips in my mental health where I was not a very tidy person. I did lose things. I did have the cluttered room. Now, granted, I never had the money to buy towels instead of wash them, but oh yeah, I think if I did have the money, I would have done that. But having the money doesn't really make that decision any more rational when you think about it.
Oh yeah, I mean, for like me especially, it would be like I could do that route, but then that would be a whole different set of decisions that would cause me to go nuts. Like going outside, having to deal with anyway.
Exactly, and so. In kind of refreshing on decision fatigue for the show, I did come across an article I wanted to share. And so I'll include that in the notes. But I did want to make sure I had a quote from like a doctor as well, because that's, I try to make sure that I'm doing decent sources here. But there's a Dr. Tonya Hansel, PhD, and a director of the Doctorate of Social Work at Tulane University. I think I'm saying that correctly. But they stated, when humans are overstressed, we become hasty or shut down altogether. And that stress plays a huge role on our behaviors. And this article, I think, was really great because it kind of went into giving examples of really common ways that we experience decision fatigue, because you don't think about all of the micro decisions that you make, right? And that's why, these are the things that start going by the wayside when you are kind of not managing your mental illnesses or invisible illnesses, but are actually struggling with them, like how it can be a sign that you're struggling instead of managing. But the everyday examples it gives is meal planning, managing decisions at work. You just said if you're in school, that's a whole other set of like, you need to get things turned in by a certain date and da-da-da-da-da-da. And you still need to make sure personally you're doing your taxes by a certain date and da-da-da-da and paying bills and doing rent. So there is a lot out there that really, when you think about it, it's kind of easy to see how that stacks, right?
Yeah, I mean, like take meal planning with me. Like I am not I'm a functional cook, but I'm not a person that is going to make like a 12-course meal or something like that. I mean, like for me, if I'm cooking for myself, it's like mac and cheese. It's something simple. It's like pour box into bowl, put in water, stir, you're done. And because it's like the idea of following a recipe just kind of stresses me out, just being able to, because you have a lot of decisions there. It's like recipe for one dinner. You have to go through and make sure you have all the ingredients. If you don't have those, you have to go buy them. You have to portion out the ingredients into the right measurements to put them all together. Whereas with mac and cheese, just boom, boom, done.
Oh yeah, I mean, I lived on so much processed foods. And now that I've read like that can actually also exacerbate anxiety and depression, that was a big motivator in getting away from it. But I'm like you, like, oh my gosh, if it had more than 5 ingredients, I literally started feeling anxious. So I really started searching 5 ingredient recipes or finding things like Hungry Girl was very big at one point, and a lot of those things are 5 ingredients or less. It was a mix of processed stuff, but it was at least trying to do it healthier. And now, like, gosh, like hearing that from you makes me think of there's a book called The Vegan Stoner, and it's also a website. And he's great because instead of an ingredient list, he just has pictures of the items you need. And so he's made it very relaxed. And so I'm just saying, like, by the way, just a side nerd about that. Yeah, I used to live off of frozen dinners and box shit. I didn't take pictures of that. But I've reframed cooking over many years, by the way. It's not like I went from the 5 ingredients, like, oh my God, there's 7. What do I do? To cooking the way that I do now. Like I started with, I want 5 ingredients or less. I want not a lot of effort. I want to make this easy and obtainable and tastes good enough that I can eat it and start doing better things in my life. So, just a side note, you can totally baby step that. But sometimes it's that power of reframing that you have to learn how to tap into with these things, right? Like, again, to me, that seems the more rational decision is if I know I can reframe something to make it enjoyable, why not try to do that? And that's why I've got my, plant-based runner Instagram, and I share like the things that I cook. And if I'm doing a bake through of a cookbook or whatever. So, and that's where it's like, I love when I see people taking pictures and being proud of their food because it is reframing, fueling your body. And that is such an important thing to do well because, yeah, your vitamins and shit being off can affect your behaviors and mood. So, anywho, side note about the health stuff, but that's a totally probably could be its own episode. But when you consider all the decisions, like you could see how they stack, right? Because you also have financial decisions as an adult. You have hygiene, like physical, your body directly hygiene, what to wear. And then, of course, house cleaning, which is the point of going into this. But thinking of stuff that I've done, like think of how many people have credited simplifying how to decide what to wear, like as part of their success. I remember Zuckerberging, I'm throwing that in quotes, that I chose to Zuckerberg my closet. And this was, again, I started working in the city. So I think this was right before I met you. I had accidentally done it once before because I used to love uniforms at work. Like, oh my God, everybody else thought they were terrible. I'm like, no, I love uniforms. I love not thinking about it. And I never understood why my brain would have been appealed to not wanting to think about clothes. And it's just, I was already dealing, for a while with anxiety and stuff. So even back then, and I loved having that mental break. And it goes into even President Obama. Like there was a quote that I found from him on this too. He's like, you'll see I wear only gray or blue suits. Obama said, I'm trying to pare down decisions. I don't want to make decisions about what I'm eating or wearing because I have too many other decisions to make. And so like, really, I was applying that to my life, like just by simplifying my wardrobe and just kind of not giving a shit what people cared about what I wore. And you can even see that, by the way, with there's so many people that have done capsule closets. And I'll go into that too with like some of the tools that I use, but it's just an example. Like you can simplify what you wear, and that's suddenly one less thing to contribute to overall decision fatigue. So finding things to do in that sense can be like a little bit rewarding too, like in the reward centers of your brain.
Indeed. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I would have the ability to do like what Obama did in terms of like picking like one type of clothing and sticking with that. But having said that, I can see that it would definitely have some benefits. And I think Johnny Cash, I don't know if he did that just more for the image or whatnot, but he always wore black, Yeah.
Well, I mean, there are some people who do hire people to dress them so that they can be in style and in fashion, but not have the decision fatigue, right? Like they want to be wearing good clothes and everything, but they don't want to waste that mental energy on it. So sometimes they do hire people. I do believe there were presidents who did that in the past. that somebody would pick out what they were wearing for the day. I did not take the time to side nerd about that because I didn't intend on going on this little side tangent for too long. But, it's not news, the whole idea of streamlining how you dress. And that's just an example of where you can take something away, because really, basically, it's kind of smart as fuck to take away decisions where you can. Like, even I'll throw neurotypical out there. As a neurotypical person, it seems to be highly suggested. So I would say if you are somebody that is managing anxiety, depression, and ADHD, it might be wise to take away decisions where you can so that you can maybe reduce some of those symptoms. So I think it's really good for everybody to figure out how to do this.
Yeah, I mean, little things like with food, like if you have the money to do it, there are services like Blue Apron, for instance. There are cookbooks, like you mentioned, that will have very, very easy recipes that you can go through. So it can definitely be done. The poorer you are, the more difficult, depending on the type of decision we're talking about, it can be. But even with something like food, it can be done, because like with meal planning, if you don't want that to be a decision, then it would be a matter of deciding what you're going to make and then make a lot of that, put it in the freezer, heat it up afterwards, and boom.
Yep. Those are all things I do, by the way. I do not have some cush crazy income. We live on our plant-based diet, which is another thing that I personally decided to do for my mental health. And the Mr. Reverend likes it as well. But so I did want to take this as a little bit of a time. I figured I could share the Reverend's tools for keeping your shit together while avoiding decision fatigue.
If only we had official music like dun, 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 dun.
Oh, I know, right? But yeah, because really the idea of like cleaning, okay, I need to clean, but where do I start? And then you can see you can already almost feel decision fatigue, or at least I do, because then it's like, well, I don't know what to do, so whatever. Mm-hmm. So, and the same thing can kind of be applied to anything, right? So pick your important things. Do you want to figure out like how to dress so you don't have to think about it very much, but you still like mostly look good? Because I get not everybody is cool with just wearing a polo and jeans every day. Like, well, I'm fine with that. No, but, especially people who enjoy like a more feminine look, they might not like that as much. So you might want to look into wardrobe closets and things like that. As far as cleaning checklist goes, so just the actual cleaning portion of this, and it fits in with this too. I love Pinterest, guys. I don't know what everybody else uses it for, but that's normally the place that I hit. Actually, because my brain was on this, as soon as I finished notes for this, I sat down and made a new cleaning list that I feel like works a little bit better than the old one that I had off of Pinterest. One of those silly little hacks you can do is go to the $1.25 tree, because I think now it's $1.25 everywhere. But go to the Dollar Tree and you can get just a little picture frame. And if you can, if your work doesn't mind if you print, or if you know somebody with a printer, or even, pay the one-time little fun fee, you can send it to Staples or something and see if you can print it. And then you can put it in that frame and make yourself like a dry erase checklist.
Yeah. Also, even if you just handwrite it out, you got like a dry erase board that you can do as well.
Exactly. You can do that too. I personally can't stand my handwriting, but if you like your handwriting or really don't have a printer, yeah, obviously you could totally like do it that way too. I love it. I hang it in my kitchen. I don't think it looks weird, or I don't know. You can make it look nice if you really want to, especially if you're an artist. And that kind of goes into nerding out over it, can almost be therapeutic about it too. Like me, I love Canva. So I literally think I spent an hour today making a new house cleaning checklist just to us. And I put like a little image on the top of it, like of cleaning shit, and made like this nice thing. And the Mr. Reverend, he knows that his boss doesn't care. So he's printed it and I'll have it today. So I'll have a new one and a new little checklist that I can use. So I love using Pinterest for that. So especially for cleaning. And what's nice is you can make your own, like whatever works for you. Does it work for you to handwrite it? Like you don't have to focus on finding the one on there that fits you, but it'll give you a lot of ideas, and then maybe it'll help reduce the decisions to make. And if you can kind of set aside the time to make the list once, you have it going forward.
How you describe it in a lot of ways is kind of like books about writing, that you have an author giving you like their advice on what works for them. That's what you got to keep in mind when you get a book like that, because that method that particular author about how he writes may not work for you. And same thing with the to-do list. If there is like for someone like me, if you had a highly intricate to-do list to follow, like my eyes would glaze over and it won't get done. But give me something simple that's going to work for me. But that does not mean that the extra intricate one is bad. You just have to find what works for you.
Exactly. And that's like what I ran into was I would give myself like, oh yeah, I'm going to do all of these things. And then I would do none of the fucking things. So, and I got better about it. I did make a better list that was a little bit more condensed because I realized like there's a lot of things that don't apply. So you can remove those. I'll actually go ahead and share my list. It's not something that everybody could use because I reference my cat. Beans the cat, because I've got litter boxes and shit that I need to make sure is taken care of so my house doesn't smell like, a cat lives everywhere. Right. But yeah, so I'm a big fan of using Pinterest. And like I said, from finding cleaning lists so that you don't have to start from scratch to what to wear, especially if you want to do something like build a wardrobe like closet, they make that pretty easy to surf through in a fun way. And it can even like, hey, maybe instead of surfing Facebook, where people are sharing aggravating memes, where it's a little bit more geared to start a fight than a conversation, you could take that same amount of time and just cruise Pinterest for an afternoon and see what you find. And then what's great is it's tagged it for you. So then if you later want to put aside that time to make yourself a list and get started, you can at that point. You don't have to drop everything all at once.
And most importantly, you can also take that knowledge that you've gained and do like what the Reverend does, pass it forward on social media, because I've found more often than not, you get what you sow in social media. And if you are trying your best to be a positive force, you're going to get some positive stuff back.
Well, mostly, depending on who you're still friends with.
Yeah.
Someone who won't be named. Har, inside joke.
But we're not talking about you.
Not you, wink. Sorry, we're just making fun of vague booking. But anyway, so another tool that I am a big fan of, and by the way, if having, I wanted to give one other little side thing to the whole having a chart, like a physical chart in the space. If you have roommates, any live-in relationship, it can really help a lot to make sure like things are getting done and everybody feels like they can contribute. Something that the Mr. Reverend and I talked about is that he knows if he comes home and there's not something checked off for the daily, he can do it. Or if he does something under the weekly stuff, he can go check it off. So I know that I don't need to worry about it. And it kind of gives one of those passive ways to communicate better with any of your in-living partnerships. And I say that like your roommates, especially if they can get on board with it. Mm-hmm. I've used this with roommates for years. Like I've kind of had a little bit of that communal house thing. Like more than once, I've lived with my partner at the time and we have had a roommate. And it's been a really nice way to like kind of dissuade that whole like resentment that can happen when people aren't doing their part, because everybody can kind of passively communicate on it.
Yeah, and it prevents situations like, forgetting to do something. Most of the time, I mean, humans being humans, it'll still happen. But, I can't recall how many times I had every intention to do something, forgot about it, and then felt like a fool. But if I'm not necessarily thinking of the person on the other end, it's like when I used to work at convenience stores, for instance, in my 20s, what would normally happen is you would work your butt off the entire shift. You would forget one thing. And then that one thing is what the person coming in to relieve you notices. And then everybody's they do nothing there for their entire shift, even though it's just one thing that was messed up. And that leads a very bad cycle,
Exactly. And you can accidentally do that in your own life. Like I love like that kind of checklist mentality probably more came from corporate America and somebody going, wait a second, you can apply some of this to the day-to-day too. Why not make a cleaning chart? So I love that they're out there. Now, tool number 2, I love because if you're more of a techie person than wanting something physically on a wall, or it's just stuff that only pertains to you, your own personal, hey, maybe you have like some routines you want to establish, like a daily meditation or something. Maybe you don't want to make that check mark list on your wall in your bedroom, right? So another tool that I really do love is called Todoist. It's also a great place for projects and personal non-household to-dos, like when you're involved in multiple projects like I am. This came to mind recently. I haven't been using it as much because I haven't had as many projects on my plate. But here it is. It's April. The Haunters Con is right around the corner. So now I'm starting to gather to-dos for multiple things in my life. Plus I'm trying to spin up. I'm still working on a book myself that I'd like to try to, really prioritize. And that means it's time to bust out the Todoist. I do love that the free version does let you have up to 5 projects. And you can also dump ideas into your inbox to designate due dates on later. So I actually do try to once a week go into that inbox and make sure any ideas I've dumped in there get sent somewhere. And then that, honestly, there is some research behind it that talks about basically just writing down the thing to do can alleviate some of that passive anxiety of trying to remember to do things. So I love Todoist for that. I extra love that there's an app that connects to the website. So you can actually take that time to organize things. If you'd rather do it on a computer, you can. And it still feeds into a widget that you can put on the background of your phone. If you'd like that passive thing to help remind you that you've decided to do things without worrying about setting calendar events or alarms for everything.
Yeah, and I've noticed here you did have a quote here that simply writing the tasks down will make you more effective. Tying that into school again, that's kind of the same thing with note taking too. I mean, if you were, there is something to be said about physically taking a pen and writing it out, and not necessarily even doing it on a computer or a tablet, but writing it out will use a different form of the brain and kind of sear it into your brain much more than it would be in a passive way, because you are actively putting those words on that paper, and it sounds like this is very much the same type of situation.
Oh, yeah, pretty much. I think that's why I have a preference for at least my cleaning list, to have it as a dry erase so I can at least physically tick off things. I don't normally handwrite notes. I think that part of it might be a little individual. Like, hey, if that speaks a lot to you, you should definitely do that. Me, I spent an hour on Canva nerding out and typing things out. That's like my language. And you and I have talked about that about other things, like where I'm trying to process something. I will often go to Canva and tap into that creative side of my brain to get me out of the emotional state, which is funny because a lot of times they would suggest going to a logical side. But I kind of use my logical side with my creative side when I try to process things. Like, I think I've shown you a chart before that somebody in the wild tried to pick a fight with me on the internet. And so I basically made on Canva this flow chart of how I processed the decision to basically just not talk to them anymore, just to stop it. Because, right? But here's the thing. It distracted me from writing something shitty as a comment, because of course I wanted to be shitty. That's a very genuine reaction to somebody being shitty to you, is be shitty back. So, I distracted from that by immediately rerouting the energy. I'm just a big fan of being creative, using the Canva side of it. Writing is also very creative in handwriting and things like that, but that's just my form of it. So yeah, totally consider, how do you get creative? And just to throw it out there, that quote, that simply writing things down, that was from a really good Guardian article that's actually the psychology of the to-do list and why your brain loves ordered tasks. So I'm definitely going to throw that in to go on the show notes, just as kind of some good bonus reading for anybody to that wants to continue a little bit deeper into the rabbit hole that what we actually cover today. And then finally, the last tool, and it's kind of similar to the Todoist tool. It's called Pomo To Do. And the reason that I wanted to give this one a shout out is there's some awesome psychology around utilizing the Pomodoro method. And what that is that you can basically chunk tasks into mostly 25-minute segments, and you can finish most things. Obviously, you're not going to finish an entire book, but you might finish the outline of your first chapter or something. Or maybe you want to take, hey, you're working for 25 minutes, but I'm cool with pausing on that for a 5 to 10 minute break. So it's really encouraging that chunk up of time, which you had even talked about. It is you'd mentioned something of the idea of an importance to take breaks. And that's kind of what the Pomodoro method encourages. Pomo to do lets you like make a free login. There's some features that you'd have to pay for pro to use, which I do find kind of annoying, but I've mostly found workarounds so that it still works for me. And I actually use this at work more than anything, because I can sit down and spend, like, for example, the first 25 minutes of my day, like just going through my inbox and making a list of tasks in Pomo to do. And then, after that first 5-minute break, I'll do 25 minutes and just start working down my task list. And it's such a nice thing because it's like I'm building it, and then the decision fatigue is gone. Because from the rest of the day, after that first 25 minutes, I pretty much know what I'm doing for the day. And again, being somebody who sometimes has to find ways to continue managing anxiety and depression, it's really important for me to do that. Like, it's really funny. My boss offered to give me Friday off, and I work that remotely. And I told her no, because it's like I need it psychologically. I didn't put it that bluntly to her, but I said, it really helps me on Friday, just that half day at home, because I'm logging in, I'm checking emails, I'm making sure if there's anything I need to do on Monday when I'm in the office, like I'm ready. Like, it does a lot for me to be able to do that. So it's one that I wanted to throw out there for use, especially if you are writing a book and you want to like make a game plan of how to spend the next however many hours. You can sit down, chunk that out. And then what's nice is, by the way, both of those two, along with printing off the household chore list to make the dry erase style, like the physical checklist, they act very similarly to getting likes on Facebook or Instagram, in that it boosts your dopamine. But with the bonus of you being in charge of getting those dopamine hits, instead of waiting for somebody to like a picture you worked really hard on. So we can kind of brain hack these dopamine hits, and then you can actually train your brain to even like cleaning, cooking, etc., because you're working with that reward center. And again, it goes into, when I think about what got me into cooking, it really was just finding ways to make it nice. And then my body wanted to do it more because it tickles the dopamine buttons, right? And it's the same way, like, where people really get sucked into social media. I feel like there's a lot of awareness that maybe waiting on those likes and hearts, like, yeah, sure, it gives you a temporary dopamine hit, but it's just temporary. And then when you compound that you're checking off a checklist, and even on Todoist, it disappears. And on Pomo to do, like, you can look at a list of completed tasks at the end of your day. Like, those are ways that you can play with that brain and let it see, like, there's a little wave of dopamine because I looked at my finished tasks for the day. That gets more enjoyable over time.
And I think the most important thing, and, to correlate with writing or just any big project in general, is just that doing that will make the project seem much more achievable. Because I know before I wrote my first book, the idea of, putting pen to paper and coming up with all those papers to make one coherent story was kind of scary. But again, breaking it up into, little achievable daily chunks that you can take out, take care of by the time, if you've organized it correctly. But, if you spread it out, you'll be done before you know it. Whereas if it, without, having that, without having some form of structure to go along, you could easily get overwhelmed and think, I'm never going to be able to complete this, and you give up.
Exactly. And it goes right back to, it's the same thing with something as much as thinking of what you should clean, like on the daily, on the weekly, on the monthly. What should you maybe do every quarter or so, which is literally like how I split mine out. But yeah, like, so there's little ways that we can play with that. And there is a little bit of an element of faking it until you make it. If you had asked me, like, gosh, probably like a decade ago, I'm trying to think of like when I really started like getting into cooking for myself versus it being this chore that I felt like I needed to do. If you had asked me that I would be kind of running late to something because I was nerding out and I wanted to take a picture of this pecan banana bread that I just homemade from scratch, not a mix, I would think that you were kind of cray bananas. As delicious as this banana walnut, or actually banana pecan bread that I made, and that made me late to meet Tim today. But, it really is an element of faking it till you make it, with a lot of things in that sense, right? With cleaning, with cooking, with even some of the hygiene stuff. And I guess, like, that's where I wanted to put another thought out there into the world, right? Like, take a little turn and get real with people, because we were talking about, like, there's some stuff in the air. with like kind of working towards some positive changes. And spring is a great time to do that. And we wanted to put the thought out there just to anybody listening that maybe it's time that we stop judging people for poor hygiene or not keeping a clean home or a clean space or a tidy desk, since it seems it's becoming pretty obvious that this is actually a sign or a symptom of potentially mental health or invisible illness struggles, right?
Yeah.
Because I want to put it out there, if you can't get to a point of faking it till you make it, to even start building a list or looking at Pinterest to help reduce the decision fatigue, if that's not enough to maybe help you, that might be a good time to consider if this is a symptom of depression or anxiety, maybe it is time that I do something about that. So we did want to talk a little bit about this today as part of spring cleaning is also a good time to check in with your mental health and how you're doing.
Well, I think the important thing to keep in mind, too, though, is when it comes to stuff like that, don't necessarily be too harsh on people as well, because just because somebody does have a cluttered living space does not necessarily mean that they are necessarily going through stuff. It just could be that's how they function, and that works for them. Now, having said that, if we're talking about you go to somebody's house and they have like 3 weeks of uneaten food all over the place, yeah, have a talk.
Right, because when you think about it, it is one of those hard to break cycles, right? Like if it is like trying to consider some compassion instead of looking for reasons to judge people. Yeah. If you're not cleaning due to mental hygiene or mental health issues, your space gets cluttered, which then contributes and exacerbates your mental health and mental hygiene issues. Mm. So it is a hard pattern to break. And I guess that's what I wanted to go into is if you do have a legit hard time breaking that cycle, not only do I wish we'd stop judging people for this, I also want to encourage those of us who really honestly are struggling with breaking that to take it as a symptom that it might be time for some help, right? I know something that I've talked to you about. I don't think I've mentioned it on the show yet. I'm actually in the process of looking into getting back on to a low dose the thing for SSRI, for those that don't know, that is like kind of a low dose anti-depression medication. Mm-hmm. Whatever the generic of Lexapro is. I don't need the name brand of it. I just remember what I was on before. It was successful for me, and it still seems to be like kind of one of the first ones they tend to try. So I'm actually really excited about this. I was able to put together a list, but I do also know that it has been hard for me to get through some things, like other things. And it's been long enough of me trying to fake it till I make it that I'm having that honest conversation and reaching out to somebody. And I know it's kind of been in the air with some of my friends too. I was talking to somebody and they had made a comment about how they were on their way to their first therapy session in like a long time. So, and really having that check-in with a professional has gotten easier in a sense because of the pandemic. That I've seen a lot of the commercials for Better Health, for example, that kind of gives you that ability to do online therapy right in the comfort of your home if you have that ability to do that. And now with how common smartphones are, I would say that that's a pretty good thing that could be tapped into for a lot of people, which I actually have an overall plan that I might consider doing that if after being on something for a little bit, if I'm still struggling, mm-hmm. Then maybe I do need like a little bit of extra help, like getting some things back on. So, I mean, nothing really scary, just to put any friends that listen at ease or anybody that's like, oh, the Reverend, I hope they're okay. I do think I'm okay, but that's why I wanted to have this kind of honest assessment with myself sooner than later. And I do think that I'll probably be going back to better routines that work. And once I maybe get a little bit of the assistance I'm looking for with the low dose helpage.
Yeah, I mean, and I think we've talked about it off the air and on the air as well on the show here. I mean, I know for me, it's cathartic in a lot of ways to be able to talk about mental health stuff. And I think in a way it does help. I think, even though we don't have a big platform at all, I'm not saying we do, but I love that we are doing our best to normalize it because it should be normalized. I mean, I think back, to my last 5 to 6 years, it's definitely been an interesting trip. And, the conversation that we've had today kind of really made me think back to that time because, a lot of my issues were like stuff we were talking about here. And it's just like, it's important to talk about your mental health. We encourage everybody to do it. If you are a friend of us and we know you, by all means, talk about this. We want to be, we want to support you as we hope you support us.
Yes, I know I enjoy being that person in my friend group that friends feel comfortable coming to when they struggle with stuff, because we do struggle sometimes. And it's something that, I think is pretty important to have, is that tribe of people that you can talk to. And that they're not looking for red flags or, looking for reasons to not be your friend, and having the ability to meet you with some compassion, because it's kind of weird when you think of that, people who are quote unquote friends with somebody, but that they make fun of them for, that their house is just really gross or, things like that. Like there's not that compassion being extended. And I've always found that interesting in humans.
Yeah. And how, it's like you wouldn't want to try and help them out in some way either, instead of just with the ridicule. Now, it is what it is. It's human nature, I guess. But that does show a significant lack of empathy when you do that.
Absolutely. But so putting it out there, I don't know. Like, I guess the only other thing I can go into is if there's anybody that is hesitant to the whole getting on a medication thing, because there are a lot of people who are, because they feel like it's a sentencing forever. My experience is that doctors have seemed to realize that most people don't want to be on something forever, which is great, because these pills were initially with the intent of, helping you work through things, not necessarily being on them for always. So I'm one of those people that I have no interest on being on it forever. And I actually made a little bit of a plan that I talked out with the Mr. Reverend and my mother-in-law, which is another interesting source of a human that I know I can go to and talk to about anything without judgment. Was that, I want to be on it for a few months and see how I feel. My plan is to be off of it within 6 months. And I figured, if I'm not seeing certain routines and stuff, like I said, I'm struggling with getting back, right? So this is why I'm trying to get the help in the first place. If I don't see those kind of coming back under my own, with the help of the being on the low dose, that's where I might look into better health and see if I can talk to somebody and maybe they can help me guide and still meet the goal of getting off of it within 6 months. Yeah. So there's ways to think about it. Like, it doesn't have to be solely just counseling or solely just medicating. Like, you can make these decisions in spite of whatever the doctor in front of you says, by the way, because they can make recommendations, but they can't actually make you do anything. That's not really the system we live in. But, so feel free to mix and match and see what can work for you. And like I said, it doesn't have to be a forever thing.
And yeah, that's the most important thing. It's like, honestly, there aren't that many mental issues that do require consistent lifelong medication. It's like, if you get, just because you get a cold doesn't mean you should be taking Benadryl every single day. Right. It's medicine. It's going to be different for people, but ultimately, it's for mental health meds. Ultimately, for garden variety depression, short-term medication is not a bad thing at all. If it has to be long-term, it has to be long-term. That's going to be good too. But to your point, for the most part, most people can get away with, taking it for a limited time, and then when they do, see results, go off of it, because all you're doing is just getting the brain chemistry back. Once it's back, as long as you do have the proper good habits at that point, it should stay there until the next time.
Yes. And that's my other thing, is if people are, I do meet a lot of people and talk to people that are honestly kind of scared to see doctors. And it's maybe because they feel like they have to do things. So I just like to put out there, you can shop around for a doctor. There's this whole subsection of telemed that's come as an invent of the pandemic as well. So again, it's kind of expanded. Something that I used to find exhausting about finding a doctor, and I was actually talking to my mother-in-law about this, was, you only have so many that you can afford, especially if you don't have health insurance. But if you do, you've only got a select that are in your network. And then within that, you have to consider if they're even accepting new patients. So that reduces the pool further, et cetera. And then if you don't mesh with them very well, that puts you right back into having to go shop around again, or feeling like you're stuck with a therapist that doesn't necessarily speak your language. But now with the internet, it's kind of like you discovered internet dating and you were always down for long distance relationships, if that makes sense. Like you can apply that to if you're fine with having a doctor relationship that you don't see them. Now, granted, that's going to depend on if they can send you places for labs and they'll have to work with locals for things like x-rays and tests. But there's kind of this very interesting thing that's opened up. I'm super excited about it being applied to the mental health space because I know how exhausting it can be to try to find somebody that works within your resources that you can even use.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be another conversation for another day in terms of the health industry in this country, because they do make it as difficult as possible for people to get help. But I think that long story short, there is nothing wrong with getting help. Get help if you need it, and don't be afraid to talk about it too, because also talking about it, you're going to find out that the problems you're facing, other people have faced them too. And, finding out that other people have faced similar problems can, in a lot of ways, make you feel better because you're not alone. And if you find out you're not alone, then, hey.
It's okay to not be okay. But it's not okay to be not okay for a prolonged period of time. And if there's any message I could put out there is if that you honestly feel like you've been not okay for a long time, it might be time to see if you can find somebody who can help one way or the other. If you want to start with the talking side of it, start with the talking side of it. If you want to start with, maybe this is a chemical imbalance and I can set these routines, go that route. I mean, that's what I'm trying, right? I'm going to see if I can because having the clean house and establishing these routines while I'm getting a little bit of that help, I think is enough for me. And if it's not, I'm going to talk to somebody to make sure what I need.
Also, to consider this too, even if you do have a job where you don't get paid that much, most employers today do have a program called EAP to where, you would be able to get like a limited amount of sessions. And if the issue was serious enough that you took advantage of that, I'm sure they could always find other resources to get you continued help at that point. So, definitely there are avenues out there to get help. Sometimes it takes work finding them. And even then, sometimes it takes patience to wait for those resources to become available. Because I know the pandemic has made things a lot worse. Like I've discovered that it's hard right now to see a psychiatrist because of the pandemic, because a lot more people are, seeing them. So, a lot of people have to go to their primary doctor for mental health meds. And that's a whole potential issue as well, because it is medicine, stuff that they can prescribe, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's their level of expertise. So they may not necessarily know what levels to give you.
Exactly. And that's where it's like, I want to reiterate, like, first of all, I'm not big on doctors that seem to want to plan to keep you on something forever, but that's why it's like, I think if I'm on this for that, like I said, 3 or 4 months, I want to give it. Mm-hmm. And if I feel like I'm not kind of trending back to that trajectory of being able to get off of it in 6 months, I'm not talking about going to my doctor and upping it. I would much rather try to then talk to somebody and see if I can get a little bit of that professional guidance in that mental space to help whatever little hurdles are keeping me from doing the things that I know are good for like my life and my routines and my health and my mental wellness.
And then from there, if the therapists were to say the issues are still going, so I would recommend more medicine, I'm sure you would be like, okay at that point. But the goal is to not be on it. Like if you broke your arm and they give you some pain medicine, you don't need to take that 3 years after you broke your arm,
Yes. So like if you are one of those people that really just struggles with the idea of starting to clean and doing those things, and especially like if it bothers you. But I guess like, I don't know, because I don't know if it bothering you is necessarily a good sign of whether or not it is in fact good or bad for you, if that makes sense. Because there's a lot of people that aren't bothered by being messy, but who's to say that it wouldn't really help, like if they struggle with something like anxiety or depression, if they could clean, right?
Like a hoarder.
Yeah, like exact hoarders are totally content, but we've kind of realized that that's not necessarily a good thing to be content with. So it's kind of that same thing. Like I have my, like, I know I don't like a messy house anymore because I started cleaning, and I don't want to go back to how that was, because I've kind of felt how that has helped my mental space. So just putting it out there, if it's a really that you can't do it, it might be time to consider maybe helping and taking it that you being unable to take those steps is actually a symptom of something that does maybe require some attention.
And I think that's a good place for us to leave it for this week right here. I've had a good time talking about this particular topic here, and you put in a hell of a lot of work, and that should be commended. So thank you very much.
No worries. Thanks for letting me just nerd out about spring cleaning and just basically how I just think it's good for you overall.
It indeed is. I mean, even if you're someone like me who's not the most motivated when it comes to, doing stuff like dishes and whatnot, there is something to be said about, forcing yourself. Like, even if it's just forcing yourself to clean, that at least by doing that, you're putting yourself in a spot to where maybe a friend can actually come over. And that it's like it's a little victory, but to your point, sometimes even if you just have to trick yourself into believing it's a victory, it's still a victory. And do what you can to just be a better person. I guess it takes work. We're all in this together. Most importantly, reach out to your friends and family and just tell them about your struggles. And if they are the loved ones that you think they are, they will help you out.
Exactamundo.
All right. So I think we'll wrap it up here. Thank you all for listening to another episode of Friends Talking Nerdy. We thank you for listening. Each Saturday, we will have something in this podcast space to entertain your ear holes. Until we meet again, we bid you adieu.
Fare thee well.
Subscribe to Friends Talking Nerdy on iTunes, the Google Play Music Store, as well as Spotify. Remember to support Friends Talking Nerdy on Patreon. Goodbye, darling.